Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church, without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In this same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church. For we are members of his body. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you must also love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband.
I'm hearing from people online this morning, and they're out there listening and joining part of the service, and we're glad to have them. This is not a message about family values, even though Corey read the scripture, husbands, love your wives. That goes on down further about children obeying your parents, Lord, all that stuff. But this is not a message about family values. It's a message about our Christian experience. Most of you know that Jennifer is the aquatics director at the YMCA. And in fact, she's working today, unfortunately. By training, she's a photographer. She went through Olivet and got the art major degree with the emphasis in photography. She can take a picture and make any of you look better. She can take the blobs and the blemishes and the spots out. She could Photoshop it. She cannot make you look thinner. We've asked. She can't do that. But she can make you look better. She can make you look even radiant. I noticed in the scriptures that Corey read, that word radiant comes in there. Jesus wants to present his church radiant. I'm thinking about that word radiant. When I think about radiant in a sentence, we think about she was radiant. Now, I've never heard a man referred to as being radiant. A man can be beaming, he can be smiling from ear to ear, but a woman is radiant. A man can be ruddy, but a woman is radiant. When I think of radiant, I think of gleaming skin, a bright face, loving in a way, a face that's bright and loving in a way never seen before. Radiant, smiling, twinkling eyes, everything in place. Good complexion, holding themselves with an air of confidence that says, "Look out, world, here I come." It's generally the type of people we want to be around. Remember, men are not radiant. We're beaming. We're smiling. We're ruddy. We're rough and tough. At least that's what the world says. Jesus describes the church with the fruit of radiance. What does that mean? I look at the history of the New Testament church. If you look at Paul's writings real close, you find the church was full of stains and blemishes. There was all kinds of problems going on there. Paul talked about in different places the arguing and the fighting among you. He talked about not judging each other, about the cheap gossip going on between people, about sometimes the lack of commitment. He told people to be strong for each other, to be there for each other, to pray for each other, to be concerned about each other. He talked about former ways of life creeping into people. They turn their lives over to God, and all of a sudden, something that they were involved in before just starts looking really good to them again, so they get involved in that again. In Romans 14, he says to them, don't quarrel over opinions. Oh man, I see those people back there in Rome. They all had different ideas of what should be, and they started arguing about it. We don't do that in our day and age, do we? No, not at all. Philippians chapter 2, he says, do all things without grumbling or complaining. But Lord, I don't want to cut the grass, but I have to, and so I'm going to grumble while I do it. Or I don't want to have to paint this wall or clean this toilet or whatever. But he says, do all things without grumbling or complaining. Remember, means in my own life. And I keep thinking back to things that we learned last week at that theological conference that we went to that some people were right into and the rest of us were kind of going there, what? I got to think about this a little bit later. Holy. Holy before God. Blameless. I think of this holy and blameless thing, and I keep thinking about the way the world looks at the church. We need to live so nobody can point our finger at us and look and say, and you call yourself a Christian. You see, that's the way Jesus wants to present us to God the Father, holy, without fault, without blame, without spots or wrinkles in our life anywhere. Perfection. We hung a new video projector back in the fellowship hall. It's one that was given to us a few years ago. I can't remember who gave it to us, where it came from. I accidentally found it in my office the other day when I was doing some cleaning. Tells you how often I clean my office. We had a screen that we got from Moments when that building was sold last year, and so in that back L shape of the fellowship hall, we were putting up. The screen's been up for a while. The screen is centered right where it needs to be in the area there. And we needed to make sure that the projector was going to be centered right with the screen. It needed to be perfect so it'd be lined up good. So Corey was here, and I said, Corey, where do you think the middle of that screen is? So we lowered the screen, and Corey stood like this, with his hands outstretched to the side of the screen, so his nose was right in the middle. And so I was up on a ladder with the mount for the projector saying, okay, am I in the middle yet? And he goes, no, you need to go that way about 4 inches. No, but it looks like in the middle to me. No, Pastor, you need to go that way. And so, but Corey, it looks in the middle to me. And he kept, no, you're not there yet. And I kept saying, but it looks good to me. So we finally got a tape measure out. And we measured from the wall to the middle of the screen. I don't remember how many inches. But then we went back where the projector needed to be and measured from the wall. And you know what? It's perfect now, but I was off 4 inches. Corey was right. You see, Jesus wants to present us with a spiritual perfection. And so sometimes he has to keep saying, no, this way a little bit. No, this way. And sometimes he has to go to drastic measures and say, no, check it. Stop what you're doing. Move it a little bit. Now that part of your life is perfect. And so he has to keep working and working and working on us to get us to that point. Perfection. Ephesians 4:25 mentions Jesus' love for the church. He gave himself up for her. He mentions husbands here. And I'm thinking about Jesus giving himself up for the church and us humans giving ourselves up for other folks. We give ourselves up in many ways for others we care about. A mother may give up that good piece of toast and give it to her kid, and she'll eat the burnt piece. A dad may decide not to buy that toy that he wants so that his kids can have food on the table. A husband may decide that he doesn't need that new car so his wife can get a new dress. That's pretty extreme, but that type of a thing goes on. And so when I say Jesus gave himself up for us, the church, and he died on the cross. He literally gave his physical earthly life up. He gave his position up in heaven temporarily so that you and I could have life. His purpose was to make us better people. The actual words here are found in Ephesians verse 26, to make the church holy, cleansed by water. I've been thinking about the cleansing properties of water. They tell me that back during the Vietnam War, there were guys that were prisoners of war that were getting deathly ill. And one story comes to my mind in particular, that a doctor was with a group of men, and a couple of the guys were just terribly ill. They couldn't get any medicine to help them. They couldn't keep any food down. They were just in bad shape. And so the doctor started giving them water. Day after day, drink some water. Drink some water. And before long, they were able to start holding some food down. Before long, they were able to start getting up because they got their strength back. But it started with water that cleansed their insides and that got all the garbage out of their lives that they don't need. And my phone's ringing. Sorry about that. At least in my ear. And they got all this garbage out of their lives because the water cleaned and purified their physical bodies and allowed them to be able to get moving again. I think about cleansing properties of water. I take water and I can put it on something and it'll loosen the dirt and the crud up, and I can get that dirt and that crud off. I did a little bit of research, and I don't know how scientific my explanation is going to be, but what I read is that there's surface tension from the hydrogen and an oxygen attracting each other. Think water droplets. It rained last night. There were water droplets all over my van when I got up this morning. That's because of that tension holding the water together. If you can break that tension down, it starts cleaning. We cleaned some carpets around here yesterday. The back 7 rows of pews got cleaned. If you feel a little bit wet, feel free to move forward. No, they were good and dry this morning. We use a combination. We don't go out and buy those expensive cleaners that smell bad. We make our own around here. A gallon of water, a cup of vinegar, a cup of Febreze. Think of that commercial where someone's down on the floor smelling the carpet because it smells so good because they sprayed it with Febreze. That's all the Febreze does. And OxyClean. Do you know what OxyClean is? It's basically oxygen in a mix. And so we take all this and mix it together, and it breaks down the water, hydrogen, oxygen, with some additives in it that help it, and it starts getting the dirt and the crud off. New Testament people understood the cleansing principle maybe better than us because we use those additives on water that they didn't necessarily have. They had to just take the water, hot water, and just scrub and scrub and scrub. Elbow grease. And so when Jesus starts talking to them or Paul starts talking to them about the church being holy, cleansed by water, they understand that the water is going to purify them and cleanse them. We have baptismal services where somebody comes and they say, I want to publicly testify to my life in Jesus Christ. And so we either pour, sprinkle, or dunk, one of the three. And the water cleanses sins. Proof that sins have been cleansed. And then the verse says, make the whole church holy, cleansed by water, through the Word. If you don't get in the Word of God, you don't know what God expects of you. But when I think about the Word, I think about the living Word. The Scriptures come alive. Jesus Christ is the Word. The Word became flesh and lived among us. Showed us how to live. Showed us and brought the Scriptures alive. And all this is so that Jesus can do what? Present the church to Himself radiant. There's that word again. Beaming, smiling, without stain, without wrinkle, without any other blemish, holy and blameless. I don't know what women do, but I know what men do. They present their girlfriend to their parents. Boy, that's always a scary moment. I hear it's scary for the females too. You want all to go well. You want your girlfriend to be at her best. And so you may make suggestions and comfort her and tell her it's going to be okay, and maybe tell her what to expect when you get there. I've heard horror stories about people meeting parents. I didn't have to worry when I met Marcy's parents. I already knew them. We were involved in church stuff together. So it wasn't too scary. It was just scary when we said we're going to get married. After Paul talks about all this, then he says in verse 32, this is a profound mystery between men and women. A man will give himself up. The two will become one flesh. They will make their own family. This is a profound mystery, he says. And then he says, I'm talking about Christ and the church. I'm not talking about marriage. And then he goes on and says, but a man should love his wife. He keeps emphasizing these two things over and over again. He's talking about Christ and the church. A perfect church. What's a perfect church? It's full of unity. If you back up in Ephesians a little bit, Ephesians 4 says, make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Wow. That means you and I have to work at this unity thing. We have to work at this peace thing. We have to allow Jesus to so take our lives that we have so much peace in our lives that we want peace in everything that we do. And that when trouble comes, we handle it in a peaceful way so that we're still unified. Lost my spot here for a second. There we are. Ephesians 4:13 says we're full of Christ's teaching. We're unified and we're full of Christ's teaching. I go back to Acts chapter 2. What do the disciples do there in those verses near the end of that chapter? They broke bread together. They fellowshiped together. They dedicated themselves to the apostles' teaching. We need to so have the Bible thoughts in our minds that we just automatically are out there living the Christian life. Chapter 4, verses 17 through 31 say we need to mature in our actions. He refers to the Gentiles. He's talking to the Israelites, but he's referring to the Gentiles. They have futile thinking. They're not thinking straight. They're off level a little bit. They're just not thinking right to what they've heard about the gospel. They've hardened their hearts to the gospel. They have no sensitivity to each other and to what's going on in the world. And he says, Put off your old self and walk in the newness of the Spirit of God. Well, what's my old self like? You don't want to know. But our new self is warm and loving and caring and stands up for what's right and does it in a Christian manner with a little bit of adamancy and force there to say, this is the way it should be. This is the righteous way to go. And then after Paul mentions a whole bunch of things there about putting off our old self and walking in newness of the Spirit of God, and talking about righteousness and holiness, and then he mentions a whole bunch of things there that are wrong. And then he says, have compassion and forgiveness towards each other. Wow. So, in my life, I'm supposed to help keep unity. I'm supposed to keep God's peace in my life. I'm supposed to mature daily in my actions and my thoughts and all that I do. And then I'm supposed to have compassion and forgiveness towards others. That's a pretty tall story there. Holiness. Last week at the theological conference, and just a little bit, this just touches on the very edge of things. We heard a lot about Jesus in the temple, God in the temple. If you go back into the Old Testament, Solomon was given directions by God for the temple. And the statement was made that God is picky and wants a good place to live. He wanted it beautiful. He wanted it neat and clean. He wanted it germ-free, pure and holy. And so I started thinking, if God's going to live in my life, if the Holy Spirit's going to take up residence in my life, and He's picky, He wants a clean place to live. He wants a pure place to live. And so in order to have that, He has to create in me a holy and blameless life so He can take up residence in my life. And if it means battering me around a little bit, so be it. If it means badgering me a little bit, so be it. To bring me to that place where I'm holy and perfect and He can present me to Himself as the one He's proud of, the one He wants to say, He is mine. We get excited about attendance in church and buildings and cash. I look around this morning at the attendance and I'm thinking, well, they're out of town and they're sick and I don't know where they are today, and I'm just looking down the list, and it'd be really easy to say, wow, attendance is down today. And then I'm hearing from people online and thinking, well, at least they're online. But if we had the place packed, we'd all be excited. Because that's the human thing, to get excited about attendance. A friend of mine posted a picture online yesterday. It was a video of a church that they used to attend, or they attend now, but the building the church used to be in, Flint Central and where it used to be in Flint, Michigan, they drove by and took a video of the building. And it had another denomination's name on it who have left the building. Windows were broken and it was overgrown. Weeds all over the place. It looked terrible. And it was a shame to look at, a shame to think about. We go by a building that's nice and bright and gleaming and the lights are on and the parking lot's full and we get excited because look at that great building. When the offering plates are full, we get excited. You see, those are the fruits of our human Christianity. Attendance, buildings, and cash. The ABCs. But Ephesians 25 again. Christ gave Himself up for us, the church. Now I remember in Luke it says when even one person repents and transforms their lives to Jesus, There's rejoicing in heaven. I think sometimes all we need is a real good scrubbing, the cleansing with water, just to remind us of who we are in Jesus. And the thing is, we don't get to this perfection on our own. No way I can do it on my own. But we do it through the power of Jesus. And it takes a strong will on our part to allow Him in. It has to be our desire to be like Jesus. It has to be our desire to open our hearts and our minds and our will to allow Him to change us day by day by day.